This is Michael Osterlink. Welcome to O Radio, where we explore individual and social transformation through collaborative action. I'm a psychotherapist with a transpersonal and somatic specialization. I'm also a transpartisan social entrepreneur and head instructor at SEALFIT's Unbeatable Mind Academy. Today's show is sponsored by the Synergy Float Center, a premier flotation therapy center located in Old Town Alexandria. When you take time to slow down, amazing things can happen. Take care of yourself by booking a float, sauna, or one of the many other services they offer today. You can learn more about them at synergyfloatcenter.com. Today's guest on O Radio is Dr. Stuart Sovatsky. He is the author of many books, including Advanced Spiritual Intimacy, Words from the Soul, Your Perfect Lips, History of Yoga in America in the Columbia University Desk Reference on Eastern Religion, and over 40 yoga and clinical articles and chapters, and was interviewed by the science editor for the New York Times on Kundalini Tantra. He has over 30,000 hours of counseling experience and directed the first spiritual emergence service in the world since 1983, the Kundalini Clinic, that helped modify psychiatry's diagnostic manual to include spiritual issues and depathologize meditative states. Stuart was chant master with San Francisco's band Axis Mundi for 20 years, pioneering a cave simulating electronica for 130 Burning Man community events, leading kirtan events throughout Europe, India, and the US, with numerous world fusion recordings in the top 20 of thousands at SoundClick. He has done intensive Kundalini yoga for 46 years, including 6 hours a day since 2018. It's good to see you, Stuart.
Thank you, Michael. It's good to see you and stay in touch. As you did get a chance to mention that we've been in touch for more than 20 years, right?
Exactly. So you've been with the mid-90s?
Probably, yeah. So it's 25 years or something. Right?
Wow, we're getting older. That's for sure. So since you brought that up, for folks, just so you know, my connection to Stuart, when I was in grad school studying transpersonal psychology, I'm not really sure how we encountered each other, but I discovered your work, and I was really amazed by your spiritual existential approach. And I kind of hired you out as a mentor to bring some of my case studies with me to work with you to understand your perspective through my clients, which were amazing insights that you had in terms of kind of the human connection and working with clients. And then we've remained friends ever since and stayed in contact for 20 plus years, which warms my heart, and it's always nice to talk to you. So today, Stuart, I want to talk to you about something you posted on Facebook, which was the medicalization of life. And I know, you primarily focus in your content on Facebook around the psychiatry and psychology, and how the model we use in the West is kind of depersonalizes people, makes them cogs in machines, looks at them as variables that you kind of maneuver around on a chessboard, as opposed to, fully expressed human beings. And I might be mischaracterizing. That's just kind of the way I read into it. So obviously I want to hear your take on your own writing. And if you could talk about us in the West, especially in America, how we have medicalized life, and that you offer a different model, which I would say is more human and spiritually oriented than the medical model.
Right. Yeah, I like the topic. The first point is we're trying to be as effective as we can in solving problems.
Yeah.
And I think it's good to remember that the scientific method or medical model, comes out of a attempt to be as effective as possible for the greatest number of people. And standardized testing or statistical studies of outcomes and matching studies of groups to try to control for variables. The whole effort of the scientific method, going back to Francis Bacon, was to come out of superstition. Let's just see what we feel would work and test it. So really the first thing to try to remember is that you could say that the scientific method was testing the efforts of intuitives, let's say, to have this humanistic contact with people and wield whatever remedies they were using whether it was a method of talking. I mean, there are outcome studies on psychotherapy. Just the last ones that I heard of, a third got better, a third got worse, and a third remained the same. You know, so well, it's hard to know what to make of that, except if you start seeing some clinicians beat the odds and are getting 80% and better, and then it's, well, what does better mean? And then you start to get into a range of concerns of the ability to suffer better versus the elimination of suffering. If as soon as we start to make that differentiation, why would we even think about criteria that would be ways to suffer better? What would that even mean? Well, let's say we have a concept of character. Up to some degree, suffering builds character, you could say.
Yep.
As part of life. If we have the virtues of forgiveness and apology and admiring the struggle, we could say that the adversities of life have a chance to make us deeper human beings instead of having a psychiatric diagnosis, for example. We might see ourselves as having been enriched by our struggles of life. That could mean, we're let's say PTSD. Let's take, because the term itself is post-traumatic. Something happened. How are we afterwards? The something that happened, the term itself, was developed after, I think, to replace the word shell shock, the concept or the phenomenon of soldiers, military people being in horrific situations and being completely thrown by it. So on the one hand, we have the possibility of the hero, someone who goes through we could call it a rite of passage. And that's also kind of an interesting concept. Rite of passage is not war, it's actually a designed difficulty to endure, a vigil, a time in the woods with a flashlight and a penknife for 3 days and no food. And cultures around the world have utilized what we might call stressful situations to help the young of their tribe, of their culture, 15, 16, 18, 20-year-olds, different times of ages of life, to go through something stressful. They wouldn't say, well, we want to mess up our kids by giving them PTSD at an early age. So we're starting to see the difference of a medical viewpoint on this matter of stress and trauma and difficulty. And, what I'm trying to definitely make room for is not everybody will go through, you could say, the same stress and come out heroic, or certainly on the other side, all come out with inability to function. So we're starting to, get a little more complex about your original question. The medicalization, yeah, it's a best, by many minds, best effort of a civilization to try to sort out what's effective, how to look for signs to see who did well, for example, after the trauma, which could be, as I say, the PTSD term came as a concept from the military psychiatric world, but it was broadened to apply to all kinds of situations. And that, just as a slight footnote, I hope your listeners are taking notes because I'm developing a lot of little tangents as I speak. But the term, a lot of these terms have a second life, these professional terms. PTSD and phenomenon of trauma, dissociation, for example, where you're not sure if you're in present time, you're disassociated from your present time. These are two terms that, for example, have leaked out or have spread out, actually have been promoted into the lay population. If we were to say to people, oh, I think you have cancer, Michael. Why don't you let me help you? You know, you'd say, well, wait a second, how do you know I have cancer? And I said, well, I just think you do, or you have some characteristics of it. You would much prefer to have some type of lab results or lab testing to check it out. So the medical apparatus, which has its home more and more in the world of medicine, you know, it starts to filter over into psychiatry, and then or psychology, and then pop psychology is another genre that I'm kind of really pointing out, that lay people start utilizing this term. Oh, I have PTSD, or she has, or I think you have it, but you haven't recognized it. You know, is that the same as we have to watch just for a moment? You know, if someone said, oh, I think you have cancer. Well, I think you need a brain surgery. You know, or you should drink more tea for your tumor, you know, that I think you have. You know, these are medical concepts, medical phenomena, you could call them, diagnostic, diagnosable disorders that are organic, we could say, in the bodily existence of the person. You know, and we know to make that separation, let doctors diagnose. And they're not going to also just do it off the cuff. They're going to eventually, or maybe immediately, want you to take some lab tests. So start to see the specialization or the strength of the medical model, you know, where we would all tend to trust it. I don't mean without exception. Some people will believe they have cancer or get diagnosed and try to treat it holistically. There's lots of, you know, variations of not participating in the mainstream medical model, even with medical issues. So I'm just trying to lay out the land of this question, which is kind of a broad territory. There's mountains and hills and valleys, all kinds of areas about this medical model. But now I want to focus into where it's more subtle, where the gaze, the way of looking at people through a medical eye, versus, this model of, you could say, a poetic approach. You know, looking at struggle of life and you see some beauty in it. That's what I mean by the poetic approach. And you start to wonder, or at least I do, and this was my whole career, is, there are some categories I always keep my mind open where medication is could be helpful, which is definitely way over there in the psychiatric and medical world. But I also would watch if I'm not looking at my clients, and as you've noticed, I've been doing this for close to 50 years now, and more than close to 6,000 different people, probably all over the world too, lots of different countries, Africa, Asia, Russia. You know, what I would also add in is that we're not looking at a specimen, which is part of where the scientific model came from. Is, you know, when you're looking at a butterfly, we don't imagine the butterflies looking back at us. When you look at a rock sample, you don't feel, oh, the rock just changed, it got happy because we were paying attention to it. But you're smiling right now. I think everyone can see that. That the human being and the dog and the kitty and maybe the goldfish, you know, we're going into this realm of subjectivity. It's often contrasted with the idea of objectivity, you know, but this is where they're not to be so much contrasted. They're tandem. They each have their strengths. But in the subjective, in counseling, you know, we're really championing the difference, what we could call the human to human interaction. I think of one of the most significant medical cures, I could have to call it, in my profession, you know, all these people, was a couple that I saw, and she had endometriosis. She was going in for surgery, these fibroids, and, you know, not a good thing, and diagnosed, and it was at a high enough level, nobody doubted that the medical intervention would be some type of surgical intervention. And we talked about, this is a difficult topic, but, you know, this has happened to have been the topic. We talked about an abortion that happened some years before that had been kind of not talked about. It was just kind of moved on. Abortion can be that kind of a procedure where you kind of just not get too much into the loss, let's say. You think it's a good thing. There's politics, even, you could say, around it. To feel good about the abortion rather than have misgivings, has some kind of pro-choice emphasis to it. If you're pro-choice, you're not really tending to linger in that I just do something very troubling, and not just physiologically, but morally. So now moral questions start coming in. The medical model definitely has concerns about morality. And yeah, you start to see, the medical model is modified, you could say, by what's ethical and what's moral. But back to my couple, after talking about this with their husband, they realized they had never shared any sense of grief about this abortion. They both cried in my office. One, I think it was the wife, said she had been lighting candles without telling her husband to commemorate this loss that had been, I think it was more than 5 or 7 years ago. She had been, to that degree of dealing with this loss. And then he spoke up his side of how he had never talked about this with his wife. They just kind of felt a sigh of relief and had their private thoughts about it, but didn't say, gee, how are you doing week after week? Oh, I think I feel better now. Yeah, I'm over it, meaning the medical side of it. But the psychological side, as I'm saying, went on and on in these different ways. And for each person, they never communicated. After that conversation in my office, the woman went to her physician for her preoperative checkup. Now, this is the part that, it's like Ripley's Believe It or Not. He couldn't find any fibroids. The surgery was canceled. I have a few other, I don't know what to call them, miracle interventions. The medical model is, I wouldn't say don't go to that client. Don't go to your preoperative checkup, because it went away. I think I know how to make this go away. It was a surprise, but I report it in that sense, almost like a scientific case of one. But now I can, go to a broader range of problems where profiling. Profiling is an interesting term in our modern world. It can relate to violent people or people at risk in many ways. At risk even is a kind of a demographic term. Certain criteria are met. A teenager is called an at-risk kid, meaning they could break the law. And so you want to get them counseling beforehand, So profiling is, establishing a scientific method of criteria that are typically a part of a certain, in this case, person's makeup, you could call, or character, or their function in the world. Kids are missing a lot of school. Their clothing isn't kept up. They're coming in late. They're not finishing their assignments. Different. And then you find out the father's out of work. These are criteria. We add them all up, and then the counselor or the teacher says, I think you should talk to your guidance counselor, something like that. And of course, that's an HR. There's looking for signs. It could be alcohol consumption. Somebody notices somebody's drinking, and then they're not coming to work. So these are criteria. It's a sort of a scientific method of deduction. If these things criteria are present, then thereby they stack up, and now we have a person that should get counseling. So the challenge, as I'm going to now move into for the counselor, is really the diagnosis is interesting and possibly helpful. It's the whole point of screening and getting someone referred, right? But once they're in your office, it's a very different context. Your goal is not to keep diagnosing what the person has and what their new criteria. Some people would say, yes, you're tracking for progress, the diminishing of symptoms. they're called symptoms now, not criteria, when they are taking place in the therapist's office. But what is more subtle level is if this is, if I look, I'll cut right to the decisive difference. If I look in the eye of my client and feel admiration, if I start looking up, feeling like I'm looking up to them as a person, rather than looking at them as what's wrong, what are the criteria, are they fitting what I was told? If I miss out on shifting literally my perspective, the way I'm looking, I found that I'm losing something. I don't say things like, I'm so glad you're here. I admire your courage for coming to this session. You either were referred and you had to leave to be helpful, or you came on your own will, 100%, and you're just meeting me, and I admire people that have a hope to improve their lives. And so now, yeah, these aren't things a doctor will necessarily say to you. If they're a holistic doctor, yeah, they will talk to you as a person, not just a patient, if I can say it that way. And so, but what I'm kind of now saying is it starts to my long years of experience, make a critical difference. If I repeatedly say, every session, I can say, you know what, just because you come now, it's like 20 sessions, I don't stop admiring you coming. You could quit anytime. There's traffic, there's the expense. I start adding in the somewhat marginalized criteria or hurdles, the cost, the time frame, the giving up of other things people would rather do. And so now that these are things people didn't think was something they were going to be admired for. They're not going to be appreciated for making it to the session so much. And and from time to time, I would say, I never know, none of us ever know whether something will befall me or you. And that was our last session ever because somebody died. So I refresh the actuality of a session happening with this extremely hidden possibility that there's traffic everywhere. I used to work in the Bay Area, San Francisco area. There's a tremendous amount of traffic. People can be killed at any time. And the fact that they show up, I did do a talk on this in a psychoanalytic group, because they never thought to say something like this. If a client came late, they would analyze it. What do you think was the reason why you were late? I would say, thank God you're here. I've been waiting. I never know if your lateness is due to you died. And I mean, not that blunt, but I try to refresh the fact of merely continuing to be alive as a feat, or as a given that deserves to be appreciated. And I found that it makes a huge difference. And I do this in many, many different ways. I'm giving you, some, major examples of how to say this. It's not a medical model. Doctor doesn't say, wow, you're 10 minutes late, and I'm just really touched that you're still with us on the planet and that you made it. Doctor may say, I have to bill you for the full hour or something like that, and that's a bureaucratic response, not a medical response. But I was, and I'll tell you the little story, that drove this home to me. Must have been around 1985, I think it was, 84, 85. I was a trainee, like you were when I met you. And I knocked on my supervisor's door. That's like, 30 or 40 years ago? I can't, 35 years ago. Knock on his door at, noon or 1 in the afternoon for my hour of supervision. Doesn't answer. There's no answer. I go, wow, that's odd. Knock, 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 knock. Eventually I leave. A day or something too later, I get a phone call from his family that he was dead. He was in the home that day, and he had died 2 a.m. the day of my session that I came to.
Wow.
And I decided never to forget that, because that was the time before last I'd ever seen this beautiful human being who was my mentor. And afterwards, I got to read his notes about me after he was dead, and we were looking through his stuff. And he would take notes about me like I was his son.
Aww.
Oh, I want to tell Stuart this. Oh, I want to tell him that. Oh, this is about him. You know, so I found out that there was a hidden layer of meaning that only came out when I read his notes after he died. So I took with me, and many other experiences, I mean, hundreds and hundreds, I would probably have to tell you, that they compile together and describe what we might call, yeah, the existential, humanistic way of looking at life, which is that actually it was Buddha's way of looking at life too. Buddha's enlightenment in the story, as it goes, was as a young adult, he saw an old person at a funeral and an ill person, and he'd never seen these things really before, and it shocked him. And after that, all he could think about, everyone he saw, is, wow, this young person will grow old, this old person could get a disease and die. And his heart became totally compassion driven. And that's a big word, compassion, that not the medical gaze is trying to add in compassion, but what I'm saying is making a huge conversation about admiration and not just compassion. I found that compassion tended to be for the suffering part of the individual. And even if you're trying not to feel pity, you're pulling stories. And this is the medical model too. Why would you go to a psychologist's office if it wasn't to talk about getting your problems helped, getting healed of your PTSD? You know, you're going there for that. So why is he admiring me all the time? When are we going to talk about my symptoms? And so what I would find out, talking some about the symptoms, but admiring about the challenge of broadening one's perspective. And then if I see a person smile suddenly, like I did see you now again, I would say, your PTSD just went away. And then I would say, look around my office. And they'd say, oh, yeah, right. I didn't see that before. I'd say, yeah, when it goes away, you leave that belief about yourself, or that way about yourself. The moment of smiling, you're sort of calling it a freedom from post-trauma grip, And so I see the moment of it happening. And that's another aspect of the approach that I'm really sharing with you, is I started dealing with very small time intervals in which progress would happen, or a smile would happen, or a tear would develop between a couple, a tear of compassion or love or hope or good memory or something. It lasts for like a couple seconds. And I would make the whole session be about those couple of seconds. In that sense, I think, in terms of scientific models, like turning the magnifying lens of the microscope up right there when you see progress, or what I would call progress, connection between people, apology, forgiving, and then beauty, having them talk about, not just me, if a couple say, oh, you saw your husband, he just welled up when you remembered when he proposed marriage. That was 30 years ago, before you had any problems. You remember that, look at him. That's going back in time. There was no problem. It was all good stuff. And what we find out about, this psychological world is that it can be changed by language itself, by choice of what we talk about. And memories could be anywhere. And positive memories, which I was taught never to talk about. You have to get a feel for this. The medical psychiatric model, and certainly even up until this, let's say this early 70s, when I was entering the profession, we were all trained. You don't want to waste any time. You're not going to ask, oh, what was your happiest day? What are you most proud of? None of those. It was always, what trauma happened, and getting into that, and I would start realizing that I had a skewed view of my patients, but all my colleagues had that view. Right. So no one was calling, wait a second, is this odd? No, we would get in rooms together and throw around our observations, and nobody would even think twice about, is there any other information about this client? This is 60s, 70s, 80s. I think did we meet at JFK, wherever, it happens in many different schools, where case presentations are all about case presentations of medical model, you know? And so, but we're talking about personality, listing all the symptoms. And so for me to even, any of these things, thank you for making it. I admire you persevering through traffic. They smile, I say something about it. I say, look at me when you smile. Yeah, it makes me smile immediately too. That's human, that I'm smiling. You know, and then I say, how does it make you feel that when you smiled, you made me smile? I guess it makes me feel good. And I say, this is the path of well-being. And then I'm saying, I'm getting back to efficiency, which is the purpose of the medical model, is to try to have the most efficient methods with the least side effects and the most achievement of goal. And so that's where I would say I could make the goal happen immediately with no side effects. You know, the two people smiling at each other and saying, thank you, this is great. Now the art is very much a poetic venture, meaning the kind of words and conversation that I can then say, and the language I use. You know, I can say, oh, you were glowing. You look like almost like the sun coming up. And they go, ah, ha, ha, ha. But I've used metaphor. I've used part of poetic language, you know, which is not a medical term. It's poetry. And then I can keep broadening and broadening, talk about, you know, the hope that comes at sunrise. And what is that? Oh, yeah, that. And the sun comes up, I feel that way. So we're making use of, you know, this a very poetic time of day or use of language, sunrise, beautiful, you know, and that starts making, now we're doing poetry therapy. Is that a scientific project? I don't think the poets would tend to want their art to be put under, you know, insurance billable and model, but they'd be happy to be what they are. Yeah, using poetry to heal. And so then, you know, it's getting, let me just take one more step forward. You know, you're talking to people in this, let's say, poetic way, appreciative way about, they've come in with PTSD symptoms, and whatever they say, I can't sleep. I say, well, you know, that's noble. You're struggling with that. And I move to, you know, be very, very helpful. And let me make a tiny footnote. Yeah, I'm going to prescribe different techniques, you know, like the equivalent of a medical remedy, you know, whether it's slow breathing, reading stories, not looking at the TV or laptop for half an hour before you go to sleep, so the retina is not bombarded with, you know, with recent visual memory. You know, different things that you could call scientific tips to helping one sleep or whatever it might be. But, you know, is more the admiration I'm talking about, the in the moment triggering, so to speak, of a positive experience. And then what I wanted to get to is to say, I would explain to the client, you know, if we keep doing this, your chemistry may change in your body, because when you change for 1 second, your pupils expanded, your bloodstream carried different hormones of openness. Let's say maybe they're oxytocin, if we can use that term now that the science is investigating that as a love hormone. You know, there was a good feeling, adrenaline went away, or anxiety and adrenaline went away. You know, if a person feels relaxed, they're smiling. You know, if we keep a certain conversation going, I'll talk about anything. Talk about the 49ers games. You know, I get very casual because I know what my goal is. My goal isn't to stay true to a method of inspecting dreams or expecting where was the first trauma and what was that like. And then this bizarre theory, which I wrote a lot about to critique it, was this belief that if you talk about the problem long enough, you relive it, somehow you'll discharge the negativity and you'll be free. I tried it. I was trained in all that, and I was trained in very, you know, as a true believer. I did it for 10, 15 years. And then one day, and I was all alone among many colleagues, and saying, I'm not sure this is helping. I think it's starting to make my people worse. You know, they say, no, go deeper. There's more. and I would read about multiple personality disorders, people constantly going deeper and deeper. And then they would say, we're uncovering these multiple personalities that were in there all along. And I'm going, I think we're causing them. We're just making people go back in time, and like there's something there that suddenly they'll get better. And I knew Freud had tried it, and I knew some of his stories, and they shocked me, frankly. I won't get, there's so many tangents, of his early stories, and looking for the first trauma and discharge, and that was what our profession got started on. I would say, there's some degree of getting better by talking and sharing tragedies with another human being. But I don't only give compassion or empathy. I give admiration. I listen in such a way that I say, it blows me away. Look at what's happening in your life, and you went through all of that. And that was a challenge. And so that's a little word from just reflecting back, mirroring, to admiring. I started, having a little effect, but over the course of months and years, I believe that it made a huge positive effect, because my clients I was expecting that they wouldn't just have interminable PTSD. It's a strange diagnosis. Post-trauma doesn't have an end to it. It's not temporary post-trauma, it's post-trauma. And that's truly what's happened to my eyes. People never get out of it because there is no heavily expectation for PTSD to end. It was only in the last year that I looked up, Googled controversy, PTSD controversy, because I didn't know if there was one yet. There was a big controversy about that diagnosis, just like multiple personality when it was all the rage, if I can say it that way. And let me think, let's say the late 80s, early 90s, PTSD, was a big phenomenon, from like minuscule to like 20% of all women and some percentage of men get multiple personalities that are coming out. And now you can notice, I don't remember the year exactly, but the DSM doesn't mention multiple personality.
I didn't know that.
I think it's called, dissociative disorder or depersonalization disorder. But they've loosened up because there's too much controversy. A lot of this happens throughout the history of psychiatry. There's a diagnosis medicalized, it's a condition, and then people check it out and they find out that, more hysteria, the wandering uterus diagnosis. What happened? That came and went. Schizophrenic mother, the mother who's the cause of an illness called schizophrenia, that came and went. And you see, when you have the long historical view, you see medical terminology applied to psychological states. Sometimes it hits the nail on the head, it seems to be accurate. Other time, and then plugs a person into medical treatments rather than only talk therapy. Talk therapy is a supplement, and then other times these diagnostic terms, they perish, and they're kind of an embarrassment. How could we think that?
So, listen to you talk about your approach.
I can't hear you.
Listen to how you talk.
I can't hear you.
Oh, really? Oh. How about now?
I'm not hearing you.
Huh. Stuart, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, that was kind of weird. Don't know why. Okay. So, a few things that perhaps the way I might characterize what I heard you say as you talked about differentiating the medical model versus kind of the existential spiritual model that you just laid out. Three things that kind of stick to my mind is you recognize that everyone's on the hero's journey, if you want to use the language from mythology and, Joseph Campbell, who popularized that theme. And recognizing that everyone's through is on that journey in their life, no matter what they're going on in their life. There's obstacles to overcome and hills to climb and challenges they face, and you're recognizing in them of that. The other thing I heard you say is your heartfelt approach, coming from a place of admiration, care, and compassion, and love. I'll use the term love, knowing you all these years. And then one thing I heard you say too is that you're attempting to help them cultivate certain capacities in themselves through time. So they might have through a smile, they might have an opening which changes their neurochemistry, obviously, but you want to cultivate that as more of a habit that they can constantly get into, and by engaging another person in the admiration, the love, the care, compassion, forgiveness, and apology, all these different kind of things that you utilize. But those are capacities. What I hear you saying is you're helping them cultivate over time. So it's not just a moment in time, but it's something they can extend in time, which changes their whole physiology and changes their perspective on life and how they engage themselves and other people. So, is that kind of a fair way of characterizing the hero's journey, heartfelt approach, then cultivating certain capacities over time?
Sure. Let me add something. It's not for not every single person, but it's probably common hope of most 90%, some huge percentage of people wouldn't mind falling in love. Maybe it happens in the grammar school, little kids are smiling at each other, and high school they're, dressing up and going to dances, whatever's happening now, I don't know exactly. We used to go to what they called the sock hop at the YMCA, And so, this is part of life. Darwin called it, sexual selection, mate selection. It's a big part of life. So what I'm tying into is, people start to get to a level where they're talking about someone they're attracted to, or they are in a relationship, or they're in a marriage, or maybe with children. We live in an era that I've noticed changed from the 50s, when family life was sort of thought of as like going to be a good thing. I'm that old. In the 50s, I watched a lot of black and white TV. Father knows best. The top title itself could never happen anymore. That there were archetypes of on the TV shows. Dick Van Dyke, Mary Tyler Moore, Donna Reed, many different family situation comedies with a slight amount of drama. And you saw these models. And I have to say that my childhood street in Rochester, New York, that's how the majority of the families lived. We thought that if dad goes to work, or mom and dad go to work and come back, and then there's dinner, and that's called a day in the life. And then there's going to school and coming home, and you're with your family. It wasn't my family. My family was quite disrupted. That my dad did come back from, we believe, from Germany in World War II, and he was not okay. He had what they call shell shock. He did live 20 years of his life in the VA hospital, and died in that medical system. For personal revelation, I definitely wondered how his life would have been different if someone had been admiring him all along. Hero's journey in the sense of a very mundane life. He didn't get any big medals. Got a good conduct medal. I think everyone got one. But he was over there. He saw horrible things. He was not okay. When he came back, he never really was able to hold a job. He couldn't deal with authority, people telling him what to do. He would flip out and be fired. So that was my father's background. My mom held it together. She was heroic to me, obviously, but my dad also. But later in life, as I was helping other people, I thought, what if someone had talked to my dad? It makes me cry a little bit, I have to say. It's not just an interview. It's my father, and had said, Jack, you're like 18 or 19 years old. You went to this horrible situation, and who's prepared for something like that? You come back and you marry somebody, you're hoping for the best. It blows me away that you even tried. Really? Yeah. It really does. A lot of guys who won't. Maybe they'll see some pretty girl, but they won't even ask her out. Nothing happens. You got into the play of things, and you go, yeah, I guess I did. And I'm just saying that is the beginning of a conversation that I've had with lots of people, and their lives have changed. From they're going to not get married to they do get married, and I've tracked them. They have kids. I get their Christmas cards with their 20-year-old kids now. And grandkids. And sometimes they're talking about not terminating a pregnancy. And I say, you don't have to. It's a choice. You could be equal to this. You could become a parent. You don't feel like it now, but it's good to know that you don't want to sell yourself short, that you could never do. Oh, I don't think I'm ready. Well, there's a way that seeing a baby brings something out in you. You become ready. And then you become mature. That's been a rite of passage for thousands of years, parenthood. We grow up in the process, not before. And they say, really? And I'd say, yeah. I've got a couple of kids that are many that exist because of that conversation. You know, what am I going to say? So I wish my father had that kind of a conversation with someone. My life could have been very different if he had come to be on a hero's journey. But I wouldn't tend to use that term. It's a little glorifying. I would just say, you know, you're my hero. You know, I wouldn't call it a journey. I would just say, you're my hero. You know, I want you to know that. And my father would say back to me, you know, because you got to help a lot of skills. You know, father was shy, you know, he didn't know how to have too many conversations with me. You know, somebody to just teach him, ask Stuart how was school today. And then when he tells you, say, tell me more. And then when he says math class, you can just say, well, tell me more about that. History, oh yeah, you learned about that. Tell me more about that. You know, I can't tell you how many marriages and families I've helped by just prescribing 3 words, tell me more. People, that was what was tragic. You know, not only the medical model or with this poetic approach and admiration, it was the lack of therapists stooping so low to try trivial interventions like tell me more or thank you. That was thank you and you're welcome. This stopped so many domestic violent situations that I've had to intervene on, and murder for that matter. I can tell you, know, people say, oh, this sounds interesting, but what about real problems? Yeah, I was involved in a profilable shooter. I can't get too much into the detail of it for confidential reasons, but basically I never brought it up, why the profiling occurred. I just was talking to this person about it, their profession. They'd be good at it. They'd help a lot of people. Did it for maybe 20 sessions over 8 months. I did background checking, you know, to be sure there was other people being watchful. You know, I took it seriously. You know, what was the presenting, let's call it, profilable event. You know, sign that something could happen, you know, so I wasn't naive. But in the session, yeah, a lot of admiring, and we never talked about it. And at the end, I mentioned it, and then I said, you know, that kind of situation, they're just like us. Shooting people, you have to always remember, they're just like us. They're not like some Hollywood movie bad person, you know. And he started crying. He said that it's like shooting another person. It's like I'm another person. I said, yeah, you take it very seriously. It's not something to just joke about. And then I said, I don't think you're ever going to like just flippantly shoot people. And he changed 180 degrees. You know, he was one of, you know, he's a gun carrying guy, NRA. It's not like I'm saying anything categorically, but he was somebody that, and this is going to happen more and more. We have a red flag law. I think it's coming into being passed, where everybody's sort of deputized to, if somebody in your family or a friend is talking, they're depressed, they have signs, scientific signs, you know, you say you have to go to a therapist. That means there's going to be a lot of people like this guy that showed up in my office. And how are we going to treat them? That's why Harvard, #1 university press in America, you know, I wrote them a little bit of a query letter about the rewriting my book, Words from the Soul, updating it, and they got very interested.
Oh, good.
So, you know, and there's lots more details that I can bring out about how people, because I got very interested, how people talk themselves into homicidal, suicidal, or divorce, because it's a conversation in their head. You know, they say mental health. What does that mean? Mental health problem, gun problem, mental health, either or, you know. And that I had to analyze too. You know, these problems get politicized. You know, transpartisan is very helpful. Because once you politicize, it's like the Yankees and the Dodgers. You know, they're perpetual rivals. You can't ever agree if you're on liberal or a conservative. You're not supposed to go to the other side. You know, that's a problem. You know, so you start to say, that mental health side, when you really, people stop, well, what does that mean? You know, it's really sentences that go through a person's head You know, we can say, I feel like shooting someone, that's a sentence. But if I act it out, now it's a crime and it's a tragedy. So if you boil it down, that's what you're trying to stop from happening if you're the mental health counselor with someone who's saying, I feel like slitting my wrist. I feel like getting a divorce. You know, like my marriage is done. You know, different phrases. And I learned how to take each phrase apart and show people how they convince themselves. It's called cognitive psychology. They convince themselves with words. And oftentimes I would eat the other, and they didn't look at all like, to my eye, they didn't look at all like the way my client had described them. They were regular parents. They weren't demons from hell. And that was odd. My colleagues, you know, when I would say that, because they wouldn't meet the parents. You're not allowed to in some ways. You're supposed to only see your client, and the container is sacred. You can't break it. And I started to see that's not sacred. My goal is helping people. It's not the method, it's the goal. So I would say, I want them to meet your parents. They'll be helpful to me, not harmful. You can handle it. I can handle it. I can handle loyalty to you, loyalty. It's all one anyway. There's not sides. You know, that allowed me to think much better thoughts. When the family would be in my office, I wouldn't say, well, who's angry at who? That's what we're trained to do. I would say, what do you love about your mom? What do you admire about your child? And they start crying immediately. I say, take a look at each other. And they're all in a different mood completely. So, you know, there's so many different rules I had to break, whether medical model, which, yeah, the sacrosanct container, which is like a petri dish, you know, you want to keep it separate, the individual session from the family session. I said, no, it's life. It's their whole life we're trying to help. And I can do it. We can do it.
So Stuart, where can people learn more about your approach? I know you've written quite a few books. Where can people find your books, find your articles you've written?
Words from the Soul is State University of New York. It's out there. You can get it very inexpensively now. It's $5. Some hard copies like $150 because it's, you know, hard to get, but you can get the used copies for $5, $6, $7. Also, you know, I hope that people who are listening that are responsible for their volunteer basis or professionally, you know, they want speakers. I'm in a retirement mode. I'm spending 5 months of next year giving trainings around the world.
Oh, nice.
Because people in Europe heard me speak. You know, I did get to present this gun case, this shooting case, and with a PowerPoint, I made a presentation out of it. People blown away. They never heard of such a thing. Comes in, he's profilable, and they're not trying to. Everybody wanted him in jail. They wanted the cops in. I said, no, I'm going to talk to him. I didn't mention it for 8 months. What? None of it made sense. And then at the end, yeah, I say he broke out into tears. He had an awakening. So what I do is travel around. People can read my book. If they want me to come and speak at some group, yeah, I've tried to get more well known in my. Even though I am prominent, I was the president of my professional association in America for 20 years with a couple other people of transpersonal psychology. I've done projects, as I think you mentioned, with the Office of the Dalai Lama. And I was flown to Slovenia to meet the president of Slovenia after the Bosnian war zone was a mess. They secretly flew me there to talk to this man, Yanis Stranovsky. So I have a lot of high profile credentials that I never broke the confidentiality until these people died, and it was okay because this was a bit secret. You know, being flown secretly to meet a president of a country, and I chanted over him. I didn't talk about that while he's alive because his detractors would use it against him. But now I can talk all these stories. I have plenty of stories. Harvard's interested. I'm doing it all over the world. So yeah, people can read about it. I'm not doing any private practice. I'm not taking new clients. I have a number of trained people that I refer out. But yeah, I love talking with people like I am right now in different conferences and settings.
Is there a website people can find your work as well?
I'm Luddite. I'm avoiding, you know, if you want, you know, publicity and all that kind of language. Yeah, I saw that it's thin. I wanted to rely on my character, if you can say it that way. Word of mouth. So I didn't buy any advertising. You had a website for a while, but what you can do is friend me on Facebook.
Okay.
Because then I can be on one-on-one conversations. I post only what I want to, as a teaching example every day. It's low tech. It's not a part of the whole internet website industry, really.
Well, I'll make sure I include a link to your Facebook page. People can follow you up there and befriend you.
Yeah.
Stuart, great to see you and talk to you. Once again, thank you for coming on again. For folks who are listening to this for the first time or watching it, we actually have probably about half a dozen conversations that I've had probably over longer than a decade. So you can also check those out too. Quite a few of them are on Kundalini Yoga and a post-puberty puberty. And I'll include those in the show notes too, so people can refer back to that conversation. And I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks again, Mike.
Thanks, Stuart.
Good night.
Bye-bye.